Thank you. And I'm going to interrupt with some breaking news. Mr. Vice President, Democrats have joined with Republicans to oust Kevin McCarthy from the speakership of the U.S. House of Representatives. Clearly, this is developing as we are talking right now, but with a development like this, what sort of a message do you see something like this sending to other countries about the stability of U.S. government? I mean, the Speaker of the House is arguably the most powerful member of that chamber. And what do you think this says to countries who are looking at what's happening here?
Well, let me say that chaos is never America's friend. And it's never a friend of American families that are struggling. And I'm deeply disappointed that a handful of Republicans would partner with all the Democrats in the House of Representatives to oust the Speaker of the House. But I expect before the week is out, there'll be more votes on who will be elected Speaker of the House. And I expect that most of the Republicans in the Congress will vote again for Kevin McCarthy, the way they voted 15 times over earlier in the year. What troubles me about this is that none of this, and maybe the days and weeks that this will now capture the Congress of the United States, is doing anything to solve the challenges that American families are facing in this economy. None of it's doing anything to secure the southern border of the United States. None of it's doing anything to lower the cost of energy that's putting a tremendous burden on American families. So I think Congress will continue to work its will, but for my part, if I'm President of the United States, I'm going to work really hard to create an environment in Washington, D.C. Where we focus men and women at both political parties on the challenges facing our country. I mean, I said at the very beginning, Meg, the reason I'm running for president is
our former governor, Mike Pence, talking about Kevin McCarthy being ousted from his speakership. That was the biggest story of this week here in America. For those who want context, Kevin McCarthy was voted out of office, making him the shortest serving Speaker of the United States House of Representatives at only 270 days, as well as the first speaker to ever be removed from office using a vote. This is all a first in U.S. history. It was forced by a contingency of right-wing conservatives throwing the House and its Republican leadership into chaos. It is the end of the line politically for Kevin McCarthy, who has said repeatedly that he never gives up, but found himself with almost no options remaining. Neither the right-flank Republicans who engineered his ouster nor the Democrats who piled on seemed to be open to negotiating. He told lawmakers in the evening that he would not run again for Speaker, putting the gavel up for grabs. His next steps are highly uncertain, with no obvious successor to lead the House of Republican majority. Action is halted in the House until next week, when Republicans will try again to elect a new speaker. Matt Gaetz of Florida orchestrated this rare vote on the obscure motion to vacate, and pushed ahead swiftly into a dramatic afternoon roll call. While McCarthy enjoyed support from most Republicans in his slim majority, 8 Republican detractors, many of the same hard right holdouts who tried to stop him from becoming the speaker, forced him out. Stillness fell as the presiding officer gavelled the vote count 216 to 2010, saying the office of the speaker is hereby declared vacant. And just a few moments later, McCarthy's top ally, Patrick McHenry, who is from North Carolina, took the gavel and, according to House rules, was named Speaker pro tempore to serve in office until a new speaker is chosen. The House then recessed and lawmakers met privately to discuss the path going forward. Now, I think the big question is, why did Matt Gaetz and his cadre of, to use a term from Hillary Clinton, deplorables, move to oust Kevin McCarthy? Now, to give some context here, Matt Gaetz is a Republican who represents Florida, part of the Panhandle down there. Now, part of it is personal. McCarthy is a California Republican, right? And his district includes like Fresno, Bakersfield, etc. It's not really the same type of, they're not the same type of conservative. California is different than Florida. Now, also the personal animus could be coming from an investigation by the House Ethics Committee that was looking at potential accusations of bribery, that Matt Gaetz actually broke sex trafficking laws that happened in the last Congress. But McCarthy has said he had nothing to do with that. I don't think Gaetz believes him necessarily. There is a belief that Gaetz might run for Florida governor, that this is part of him grandstanding. Okay? Like somebody like Matt Gaetz, he comes from a political family, right? His father was a state senator in Florida from 2006 to 2016 and rose to, Senate president for 2 years from 2012 to 2014. So his father, Don Gaetz, has actually announced that he will again run for state senate in Florida. Also, people believe that some of the reason may be that this sort of new political climate that we have, that people are being encouraged to not compromise, collaborate, and to be divisive, and to sort of push extreme ideologies. That's what some people believe. I think a very underrated part of the story is, and I think the mainstream liberal media is leaving this out for a reason, is Ukraine funding. The Hard Rocks who pushed McCarthy out are very much against continuing to fund this proxy war in Ukraine. Now, I talk about this on a weekly basis. We used to have an anti-war party in this country. They used to be called the Democrats. And so, for me, you have to understand it's very surreal to see Republicans who want to cut off war funding, or at least specifically for a specific war, because we all know that the Republicans wouldn't mind going to war with China or, some other country, but they specifically want to stop this war in Ukraine, which is fine with me. Completely fine with me, because as I've said from day one, this is a proxy war that is ruining America's position in the world. I think I've been validated by that. The more countries are getting away from the U.S. dollar. So anyway, this is Matt Gaetz actually talking about Ukraine and why he doesn't want to send another dime to Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This Congress has authorized $115 billion to Ukraine. My amendment would ensure that this defense appropriations bill sends no more. $115 billion is an astonishing amount of money, especially when you consider that our nation sits atop a $33 trillion debt, and we are facing $2 trillion annual deficits. And it is not as if the $115 billion has brought this conflict any closer to an end. In fact, the massacres and the killing and the death continue. The next statement is so obvious, I can't even believe I have to say it out loud. It does not make the United States of America stronger to borrow money from China to give it to Ukraine. I hear a lot of the war hawks in this Congress stand up and say, well, we have to send a message to China by fighting for however long it takes at whatever cost in Ukraine. The message we're sending to China is that they are engaged in a leveraged buyout of Russia and increasingly of our own country. We've got problems here in America with our own borders. Americans are watching as foreign flags are being erected in the middle of the Rio Grande River while our nation is being invaded tens of thousands every month. And yet we go spend all this money on the border of another country. I do not fear broken Russian tanks rolling through Europe. I fear Russia's nuclear weapons and the risk that we could be sleepwalking into a nuclear conflict that could end life as we know it on the planet, all for what? To live out some neoconservative dream in Ukraine? Give me a break. Right now, a lot of this funding that we've sent for Ukraine has been inflationary. Food and fuel. These are the markets that have been affected globally because of this crisis and because of the money we are spending to extend the conflict. At the beginning of this Congress, Speaker McCarthy said, there's not going to be a blank check to Ukraine. But when we bring witnesses before us to ask them whether or not we're complying with our own laws regarding end-use monitoring of materiel, they cannot say we're even following our own laws. Enough is enough. I'm putting my countrymen first, and I don't think we should send another nickel to Ukraine. I reserve.
Let's not abandon.
So that's Matt Gaetz talking about why he's against Ukraine funding, and I can't find no flaw with what he said. You know, I got no beef with what he's saying here. Like I've said from February of 2022, when this whole conflict happened, when we essentially antagonized Vladimir Putin into invading Ukraine by continuing to push NATO eastward in spite of all the warnings from our own diplomats, people like George Kennan, who was the diplomat to the Soviet Union back in the days. All these foreign policy experts who said, no, we're against it. Even Joe Biden, our current president in the late 90s, said that the only thing he could think of that would trigger a negative response from Russia would be to continue to expand NATO eastward. He said it out of his own mouth. So Joe Biden can't even pretend that he didn't know this was going to happen.
I think the one place where the greatest consternation would be caused in the short term for admission, having nothing to do with the merit and preparedness of the country to come in, would be to admit the Baltic states now in terms of NATO-Russian, U.S.-Russian relations.
So he knew that it would hurt U.S.-Russia relations. He understood that we were playing with fire. That video is actually from 1997, when a lot of, I think it was a group of 50 college professors and journalists and ambassadors and diplomats all got together to write a letter to Bill Clinton, who was the president at the time, begging him not to expand NATO eastward. And he did so anyway, knowing that it was going to eventually cause a major conflict with Russia. So here we are, and you have all these different neocons who've pushed this war, and now we spent $200 billion in Ukraine at a time when you have thousands and I think probably millions of people by now who've invaded us from the southern border, where American standard of living has fallen off of a cliff, and and you just have really a small cadre of Republicans who are fighting back. And the real shame about this is, like I can't reiterate this enough, this is what people on the left in Congress are supposed to be doing. This is what black people are supposed to be doing. This is what the Congressional Black Congress is supposed to be doing. they're supposed to be a threat to the leadership. The Justice Democrats were started by Kyle Kulinski, who's a liberal, a liberal political commentator, and Cenk Uygur, who's also a liberal political commentator. They actually started the Justice Democrats, which are responsible for getting us Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I think Ilhan Omar and the Squad. I think they were sort of the impetus for the Squad getting together. And the whole purpose, and you can ask Kyle Kulinski this because he talked about it, he said the purpose of them was to be a left-wing version of the Tea Party. The whole purpose was to push back against the corporate sellout Wall Street military industrial complex, prison industrial complex wing of the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi, the Joe Bidens of the world, the Joe Manchins of the world, was to essentially do what the Tea Party had done. The Tea Party tormented John Boehner, ran John Boehner out of politics. That's how the Republicans get down. When you don't do what they want you to do, when you go off script with them, they run you out of politics. And so what are you getting now from the Justice Democrats and all the AOCs and all the black congressional Congress people? They're all laughing at the Republicans going, aren't you so happy that these people are in chaos and we're just so orderly? No, because the status quo is what got us to this point right now. The status quo is why Washington, D.C. is as corrupt as it is. We wanted fighters to push back against the corrupt leadership of the Democratic Party. And instead, we got people who pose in Rolling Stone like AOC and Ilhan Omar and all these, and then the Squad. And you get people who take pride in being subservient to Hakeem Jeffries, who is now the Democrats leader in the House. These people take pride in being subservient. They take pride in not pushing him. Imagine if the Squad or the Congressional Black Congress or any of these people said, until we get a vote for reparations, until we get a real push for reparations, or for Medicare for all. Let's just say something a lot more broad, like Medicare for all, right? We are not going to support Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries for Speaker. We're not. We're not going to. Until we get your support for Medicare for all, we are not going to support that. We are going to withhold our support for the Speaker of the House. Now, there were people making that argument that the Democrats should do that. In 2021, at the height of the pandemic, there was a push for force the vote, to force a vote in the middle of a pandemic for universal health care on the floor of Congress. And the Democratic Party sent its apparatchiks out into the media and into the blogosphere to lie to us and say that if we did that Kevin McCarthy then would become Speaker of the House, which now you see, thanks to the Republicans doing basically the same thing. That's not true. That just wasn't true. It was never true. Hakeem Jeffries didn't automatically become the Speaker of the House just because, just because a few people pushed back against Kevin McCarthy and because he had to vacate his speakership. The whole point was to use your leverage to achieve concessions on issues. And this is how black people and how the left are kept out of power, because we refuse to do that. When we have opportunities to push for power in Congress, the people who represent us kowtow to Nancy Pelosi. They kowtow now to Hakeem Jeffries. And unfortunately, you don't get any real resolution here. We get the same status quo. We walk outside our door, we see the same people struggling and starving. We still don't have universal health care. We still don't have the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, still don't have the PRO Act, still don't have a living wage as the minimum wage. But hey, at least they're all rich, right? They'll be all right. Everyone in Congress will be, even if you're not. All right, folks, when I come back, I'm mopping up. Stay with us here, WLTH 1370M, My Country with Scott Cannon. Be right back after these.